Yeah, this book is right. And I don't know this much. Oh. Okay, I wrote down some pages that it's what, 359. This is what they use to get people in. Okay, we're gonna watch you all. Now let me try to.
You want to cut out my commission?
Oh, I didn't realize you were. I'm sorry.
You want to cut out my commission?
That means you're daily.
Okay, let's see if we get back on over here with Zoom. We haven't been joined by anybody yet. Is our list over there by any chance? I believe so. Okay. And we want to share screen. Yeah. This is a Google search for Scientology. What did you notice about this Google search?
Looks like it's trying to draw people in, like, so they're curious and all that, maybe get interest or something.
Yeah, but there's another interesting feature about this. Yeah, that would help. Oh, wait, I keep forgetting I've got a. There we go.
Oh, that's better.
That's almost too big. Okay, here's the top. What did you notice about that? It's not obvious until you think about it. And it's really obvious if you've done this search on any of these other groups that we've looked at.
Gloria, I know you have.
It's part of Christianity. I know they take their information from Christianity.
Don't see anything in there about the Bible.
No, they take.
No, but even more importantly, notice that all the listings, Scientology, you have 2 Wikipedias, a Twitter, which is theirs. You have videos, all of which are theirs. Scientology religion, which is theirs. You have a CNN, Scientology TV, which is theirs. Scientology Tampa, one of their churches in a particular location.
Everything belongs to them.
They have everything except those 2 sources on the page, the search. There's no articles about the error of Scientology, the cult of Scientology, none of that. If you do any of these other groups, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, half the sites you get are going to be people who are analyzing them negatively and critically.
Yeah, but it's theirs. They're putting it up and they don't want it.
Yeah, this is Google.
So-
This isn't theirs. This is just Google.
Yeah. Then the owner of Google probably lives in California.
Well, that may be, but
Probably one, huh?
and he may even be one, but he wouldn't have to be. It's that this just shows how aggressive, effective, especially multimedia they are,
Right.
because all you have to do is know what the analytics of Google are in order to get that going on your sites. And so Google will pick up all of your sites and fill up the whole page, and there won't be room for anybody else on the first page. And it's not that Google's made that decision that they're going to highlight you. It's just that that's what they measure on sites is where you end up on a Google search.
Well, Google,
And
Google's probably in control, and I wouldn't be surprised if.
Scientology is that up on how to get themselves in front of people in a positive way, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. And it's not something that they necessarily had to negotiate with Google. All they had to do was know what Google's analytics are, what their algorithms, how they work, and just see that they put in enough of the right information enough of the times from enough different sources, enough different people, that theirs are the searches that come up. And that just gives you an idea of how effective they are.
Well, if you Google, because I don't Google, but if you Google, say, the Catholic Church,
Yeah,
are you saying, wouldn't they write theirs like this, or would they have all these people saying, well, yeah, they do this?
no,
No, so it would be like this anyway, wouldn't it?
not necessarily. And on most of the groups, if you Google the group, you're going to get 2 or 3 articles that's going to be highlighted that is critical of them, is an opposition to them. Because those people have been popularly enough looked up that they're going to show up on the Google searches. Because there's enough groups around who have designated these groups as cults. They're off limits. You need to stay away from them. And so they've got enough people doing these searches on a regular basis that the negative stuff comes up, not just the positive stuff, not just the stuff that they would like, stuff by their own people. You're going to get some of that others. And you almost never have to do any deep search at all to find 2 or 3 negative articles that are going to lead you to some more without any trouble. But you couldn't have done that on this front page, not with Scientology.
Well, that's probably the only reason we have a Google account. Because
Here's their mechanic. And this is fundamentally why they became a religion. So just keep that picture in mind. This is a negative site by a university that researched this particular aspect of their machine. This is their e-meter.
An e-meter?
An e-meter. This is their primary mechanic. This is their primary means. So in order, I just want you to see a picture of it. We're going to talk about it. Okay. There's several ways I could do this. But I thought because they're doing this, I would just show a little bit of this so you can see them. This is their presentation. That's their introductory. And they'll lead you through the whole series of these backgrounds and origins, Scientology practices, ministry, principles, ceremonies. So let's go look at this one. Well, are they not going to want to do us today? There we go.
Scientology contains tools and methods to assist you in finding your own answers to life's questions. Your own truths about your life and you. But who are you? You are not a physical body. If you have your appendix removed, your personality does not change. You are not any less who you are.
That depends.
Talk about the parts of your body. You probably say, this is my arm. This is my leg.
If you've known some amputees, you know there's some elements there that we identify with our bodies far more than we sometimes think we do.
So if you're not your body, what are you? Your mind? To answer that, you need to understand what the mind is. Your mind is something you use to figure things out. It is far more accurate than any computer. It has a memory bank containing pictures. All the memories of everything that's ever happened to you. When you think of something, you get a picture of it. But if you don't these pictures, even when your eyes are closed,
no.
Then what is it? It's looking at pictures.
I do not. My mind does not function at all in pictures. It's not blank, it's all abstract. I don't have pictures. No.
In Scientology, we use the word thinking. The term thinking is taken from the Greek letter theta, which has long served as a symbol for thought or spirit. We use thinking to avoid confusion with other concepts and beliefs regarding the soul or spirit. It isn't something you have. You wouldn't say, my thinking. You simply say, me. You have a body. You have a mind. You are a thing. Scientology offers tools you can use to increase your abilities and reach your full potential in life. For the subject of Scientology is you.
Okay. This is, as they say, a new religion. It arises out of work that Ronald Hubbard does way back in the 1940s, into the 40s, into the 50s. His career up to then of significance of note was in science fiction. And he becomes intrigued with what we are, who we are, and begins to work on this idea. Finally, he comes up with both an understanding, partly presented in that video, and then a way to deal with it, which he called the Dianetics. And he writes a book that becomes super popular. And from that, an organization is formed, built around this technique of Dianetics, which is premised on what was expressed here, that we are non-material beings. They use the word Thetan. They invent that simply so they don't have to argue with people when they use the word soul or spirit, person or whatever, that then they have to explain that what they mean by their use of the word is not what somebody else means, so they just invent a new word for you. But it essentially sets forth us human beings as a spirit, a non-physical being who has, at the present time, a body, which is not intrinsically or essentially at all an element, facet of who we are. So their remark, you take out the appendix and you haven't changed. And my remark, if you've known some extensive amputees, that may not be true. There are amputee people not at all uncommonly significantly sensing a loss of who they are. One of the most common elements of that is what happens if a man loses his gonads or his prostate because of cancer.
What did you call it? What was the first word? Is what? Gonads?
It's gonads.
It'd be like a,
He'd be a eunuch.
Yeah.
And have you ever known men who've had that, one of those surgeries? It's terribly, terribly traumatic for the vast majority of them. Even though their life has been saved, they feel terribly emasculated.
But does this fit in, say, I've seen children that have born with got on to legs, and there, and there has been some of that leader, and you'll see on TV,
Yeah.
very spiritual and everything. Because I guess that means that just because they have this body,
Yeah.
are similar to. But I know what you're saying about amputees, because if they have their arm cut off, sometimes they will feel like they have an arm or pain there. But if a child, and then they become men or women, they don't have that, never have, then I guess that's what he's.
You know,
That's their spiritual soul. It doesn't have anything to do with the body.
No, but my point is, their argument, you see, is that you are essentially spiritual and you simply have a body for however long you happen to have it. And it has nothing at all to do, fundamentally, with who you are, what you're like, which often is not true. And as I have tried to get you all to see on several occasions, that certainly is not the biblical view. You are not essentially a spirit temporarily housed in a body. Because if you're essentially a spirit temporarily housed in a body with all of its frailties and so forth, why in the world would you have any interest in recovering your body or any body at all? What would you need for it? If you're essentially a spirit temporarily housed in a body, what do you need the body for? Why would it be of any concern? Commit suicide and free your spirit. But we're not essentially a spirit that just happens for a while to have a body. The Mormons believe that we are essentially spiritual beings who are sent here, birthed into a body to be tested for the rest of our spiritual eternal life. The Hindus fundamentally believe that we are spiritual beings coming and going into this physical world in various physical forms depending upon our karma.
Depending upon
Our karma. And Scientology operates with that same basic premise of Christian Science. You are essentially a being who, in their case, don't even really have a body, because there isn't any physical. That's just projections of your spirit being. And the material doesn't even exist. You just think it's there. Thinking, of course, makes it real. What's the driving force behind modern politics? Perception. Doesn't make any difference whether this is real or true, as long as you can get people to believe it.
Like that's way back.
Of course.
Like this too, you can't just say politics, it's in everything.
Of course.
Whatever you believe will be your reality. So what I believe is my reality.
Yes.
Is yours.
Yes.
It may be completely different.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, but I still don't understand why, like their body, we discard our body, and we're still spirit. So we come here and I guess we're in a body form, but when we leave, we're not taking this body with us. We do have our spirit obviously in us.
We have a spirit.
Don't we? Yeah.
We have a spirit, but we aren't a spirit. The very difference that he makes, you see, he says we aren't a body, we're a Thetan.
Jesus took his body.
Yes, he took his body. He still has his body. One of the fundamental things that it's so hard for us in our spiritual abstraction, we're way too Greek, is for us to grasp the fact that when the Word became flesh, that wasn't a temporary arrangement. It's an eternal arrangement. He becomes flesh forever. We are this composite. We're an amalgamon. We're an integrated individual with both spiritual and material elements. And they are inseparable. We separate them at death. But the body without the spirit is easy for us to imagine. That's a carcass, bury it, let it rot, cremate it, whatever, no big deal. It's not really them. But we cannot begin to think that way about our spiritual component. But it's just as real. The spirit that returns to God, take the passage of scripture, the body returns to dust, the spirit returns to God who made it. And I pointed out that may not be spirit as in spiritual beings, maybe nothing more than breath. The dust goes back to the ground, the breath goes back to God. And the individuality, the soul, which is the word in Genesis chapter 2, the individual that he was ceases to exist. Now, I don't know how and in what way that spirit continues, with what qualities of consciousness and all the rest of this stuff. But biblically, it's as incomplete as the body that you buried in the ground. And to think about that surviving spirit as somehow full-blown human identity that is perfectly capable of existing for eons until Jesus comes back, in some state of real individual consciousness, is a figment of our imagination. It's to understand our composite nature incorrectly. The spirit of a human being without the body is as incomplete as the body is without the spirit. That's why we're resurrected, so we can be put back together again, so we can be made complete again. So from a biblical view, the very ground upon which Scientology is based is erroneous. Because they start with the premise that I'm a spirit that has a body. I am a spirit body. I am in an inspirited body. But you take me apart, and I don't have my full identity.
Yes, the Scientologists, I don't know, I'm getting confused on what I read, but do they believe in reincarnation?
Yes. Yes. They believe that since you're a Thetan, you can come and go in bodies.
Different bodies.
Different bodies.
It's the same soul.
Yeah, it's your same soul, same spirit, same Thetan. You just have a different body. And so for them, you see, it's not at all important whether you lose an arm or a leg, or for that matter, the whole body. Nothing happened to you. You're still you. totally, completely you. You just don't have a body temporarily. Now, I don't know to what degree they go into, because I haven't read them that widely, how they conceive of that spirit, how they describe it, or write about it, or talk about it. But for them, the body is significantly insignificant. It's just what you're stuck with right now. And what you really need to do in order to be successful is to heighten the thetan, enhance the thetan. In their terminology, their word is clear the thetan for its fullest potential, whatever that is. Now, in the thetan not only has a body, the thetan operates with a mind. And the mind of the thetan, in their view, is composed of two fields, two components. The first is the conscious mind, the rational mind, they call it. And this is the mind that you ordinarily live with and think with, that you perceive with, that actually, you see, it's really your mind that perceives. Your eyes, your fingers, your taste buds, they're just chemical reactors. It's your mind that interprets those signals and gives you meaning, impression, significance, value, and characterizations of what the senses are receiving. It's your mind, and your rational mind is an incredible computer that records everything that you experience in detail, in picture form. They're very big on this, happens in pictures. And that's why I said I could never be a Scientologist, because I never thought in pictures. I was a pretty good whiz at math until I got to geometry.
I was gonna say, I think got a lot of numbers.
And the numbers don't bother me. They're all abstractions, see? I can play with the numbers without any trouble. But when you have to draw the picture, the diagram of this plane intersecting with a plane, two planes parallel, intersected by a third plane, I was lost. I would struggle like crazy to try to figure out how to represent that on a piece of paper, because I had absolutely no way of visualizing it, and often I got it wrong. I would turn it in and it would come back, no, it's supposed to look like this, not like that.
The other thing though is, are they talking about something like you're just saying, or they're actually talking about like being able to go back and visualizing yourself maybe at 5 years old at a party, a birthday party or something? I think that's what they're getting at. Because if you had to judge people on algebra, geometry,
No,
all of us would know what
that's my, see, my point is that what they're talking about are your experiences.
yeah, and that's what I'm talking about, birthday parties and stuff.
Yes, or sitting in a math class and you would remember.
Yeah, but you didn't do well because you didn't understand it.
Well, and that's what your memory would be. Your memory bank would be this test and every answer that you got wrong.
Well, we've all been in classes like that. You know, mine was Spanish. I didn't pick it up.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, everybody else would.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, sometimes you have bad experiences you can think about and put yourself there, or good.
And for a lot of people, you see, you actually can recreate that visually in your mind.
Right.
And you can recall yesterday I was driving down the street. Let's see now. That was a red car that was in that lane. Now see, I have absolutely no picture of what I just said.
But most of the time, you can usually, people, when you think about this, you can remember way past.
Of course.
Not like, even today, you may not know what you had for
No,
lunch, but you can remember 30 years ago.
their point is not that you necessarily can remember all that,
But you can see yourself.
but it's all there.
Yeah.
So that's what hypnosis is not.
Well, one of the principles of hypnosis is that it can unlock that conscious control. And they're going to go there too, because they say this conscious, this rational mind with which you think, figure, calculate, conclude, make inferences and deductions, that's your wide awake rational mind that's collected all this information, and depending, of course, on how smart you are, how clever your mind works as to how well you can recall the details. And we do have this now group of people that they've identified, 20 or 30 of them around the world, who have absolute, almost total recall.
Yeah, they can recall the day.
Yeah, and not just recall what happened that day. They can recall what day it was on the calendar, whether it was a Wednesday or a Monday, and every conceivable detail.
The only
But you-
problem about this group is they say you can remember, but some of them think that you can remember in other minds. That's what.
Well, because you have, this is not the only time you've lived in a body.
Yeah, I got that, but I'm just saying.
And so there's, theoretically, you see, this Satan's mind has no telling how many years, centuries of memories. It's just a matter of pulling them out.
And that's what affects you now. You
Yeah,
don't realize it might happen to you.
yeah, in your previous mind,
It's like, or when you were a child, but you don't remember it because you were little.
yeah.
And then they try to,
Yeah, now, in addition to this rational mind, your mind has a second memory bank. And it's like unconscious. And they call it your reactive mind.
That's the other field.
And that's the field where all of the negative stuff got kept. Again, in absolute detail. And it's their belief that it's this reactive mind's memory that affects you in the rational mind, even though you don't know the connection. The reactive mind is bringing all kinds of issues to the fore of your conscious, but it's doing it underground.
You're not aware.
And you're not really aware of that. And it does it by associating every single feature in that memory bank with any feature in that memory bank to anything in your current conscious experience that in any way is connected to it. Their classic example in one of their deals that I recorded from a couple of years ago is a woman who's abused. And in this abuse, she remembers every single part of the experience, even unrelated things. So when her husband hits her, she not only remembers how it hurt and where he hit her and what he said as he hit her and what he said after. She remembers everything that's going on around them, even totally unconnected things that she received sensory information from. Car driving down the street, honking the horn, a siren in the distance, a dog barking, and that any one of these elements involved in that experience can trigger all the negative emotions of that experience at any given time.
A lot of people.
And so driving down the street someday, the siren goes off somewhere in the distance, and immediately the PTSD of her battery comes back full blown, set off by the siren, or the dog barking, or the water running, or whatever.
That is true, though, that people.
Of course.
So,
And PTSD victims will tell you about that all the time. That any feature of that super traumatic experience will set that whole experience back off again. Even trivial, even unconnected things. It was just happening at the same time, and so it's part of that whole environment, and so voila. So,
smell.
yeah, any element that was a part of that negative experience can reconnect to a similar thing at any time in your life and any experience, and therefore bring back all of those negative elements. So, in order for the phaeton to reach its fullest potential, it has to uncover all of the reactive mind's memories and control them, eliminate them. Their word, clear them. And this is done by a highly sophisticated process by a trained counselor using the e-meter.
The keys,
The e-meter. And with this e-meter, they can begin to diagnose, based on the impulses that it's interpreting in your body, the particular features, their significance, their power, and then begin to help you gain control over them. And because this is fundamentally, in that process, a counseling procedure, a medical procedure, the feds eventually interceded in this operation and began to charge them with fraud. Because there was absolutely no scientific, even by themselves, explanation for how this is really working. The explanation is that it's reading some kind of magnetic impulses on your skin. You're holding two objects in your hand, or whatever, these two cans, these two cylinders, and the person who's asking you these questions and getting you to describe these processes, which is common psychological counseling used by lots of people. Go back, your real problem is because this happened to you when you were a little kid, your daddy did this, your mama did that, and we've got to get this out and let you wrestle with it and forgive them and get on with your life knowing that it doesn't really have any power over you now. The process, the psychological procedure is common. But there are not any counselors who've really tried to come up with some machine that could tell whether you're telling the truth about this event, you've got the information correct, and certainly how you feel about it, how strongly this is an issue, and whether you're just, you're just trying to pull their leg. Because one of the problems the counselors wrestle with all the time is how authentic this person is telling you about their past, about their problems. And once you start dabbling in the hypnosis, then you run into this whole issue that has been there since the first hypnosis people have tried to talk about former lives and so forth. The fact that this person could give you great detail about this event, this place, this time, doesn't necessarily prove they were there. They read about it, they saw a picture, they went to a movie about it, whatever, and that memory under hypnosis comes back. And so there are numerous psychologists and counselors who wrestle with the real viability of these hypnotic experiences, either in terms of your former life, because now there are numerous cases of child abuse issues that have arisen in hypnosis, and there's overwhelming evidence that that memory is not true. That this mother, this father never did that kind of thing with this kid.
But occasionally you'll hear one that's been put on here and they'll start speaking of one.
Oh, yeah.
So, I never had figured that out. I guess you could always come up with some information.
Yeah, and you see there are numerous stories where people have done things like that become almost inexplicable. The near-death experiences are the same kind of thing. The fact that you come back supposedly and tell us what you saw, well, how do you really judge that? Now, in their case, they were finally able to get the, whichever one of the federal bureaucracies, Federal Trade Commission, the Health and Human Services, the medicine people, finally got them off their back by getting this machine ruled as not a therapeutic device, but a religious device. And the process, the Dianetic process, becomes then a religious ceremony. And now, under the freedom of religion, they can carry this process on, and you can't question it.
The only thing like a psychiatrist or a person that's legit, they'd be giving you medicine, most likely.
Yeah.
But are they giving medicine along?
No, they can't do medicine.
They can't do medicine. So
unless, of course, it was a psychiatrist or a medical doctor.
Doing medicine is just as bad as them doing this, in my view.
In some cases, they are.
It's sometimes they're over-medicating and everything.
Oh, yeah. And see, people like this have absolutely no problem being able to tell you story after story after story of people who were deeply troubled in one way or another and had been to umpteen doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists and self-help programs of one kind or another, and they came to the Dianetic process.
The Dianetic process didn't sound to me any different.
It's not. The process is not different. All it is helping a person deal with all kinds of negative baggage that they have and helping them overcome its power over their life.
I saw my nephew, he came from a drug rehab, and I noticed that stays away from negativeness. I don't know what kind of
Yes,
place it came from, but
Yes.
now that you're saying this,
yeah,
kind of like runs when you have something negatively.
yeah,
And I didn't think of it being negatively, but it was just a person that was in his life at one
Yeah.
time.
and it's the old PTSD. There's places I gotta stay away from, things I can't be with. Bill Gothard years ago had a massive youth program, what did he call it? Anyway, he dealt with troubled youth. And a lot of young people that he rescued from the drug community, he would try to get them into a church, and he would find setbacks because the church they were going to had near rock music in the church service. And he would bring back all the rock music background of this kid. And so he had a massive effort for several years trying to get churches, because they had a housing problem, trying to get churches to build cottages on their church property for these kids. But in the process, he could only deal with churches who hadn't moved very far into the contemporary music of the day. It's not what near like it is yet now, but because in his view, these kids would be pulled back in by that music sound, that beat. He was deaf on the early rock musicians in the Christian movement. He just couldn't stand them, because for him, this was a sound that these kids associated with all the darkness in their life.
Well, that's like, you probably heard of him.
Yeah.
Soldiers and stuff come back.
Yes.
And they have PTSD.
Yeah.
And you have to be away from your families and everything for a
Yeah.
long time, and then they, get counseling. But I still don't see how something like that, or medicine, or even like you're talking about, would completely, I get that, even Camp Hope, get that out. I know they get better and they're around everybody that understands, because that's the main thing. Somebody's watching your shoes, just like these kids.
Yeah.
And a church isn't going to do it because they haven't watching your shoes. That's my theory. But like Camp Hope, I think that they would, because those guys all know. But they do teach them, I think, understand the triggers and stuff. And they have to stay away from certain people,
Yes.
music. And I'm sure if something comes into their mind, they teach them something to go to, get that out quickly.
Yeah. Years ago, I had a lady, she and her family, her husband and her kids were coming to church here. And I went to visit them one afternoon, and I got there before her husband got home from work. And just a casual conversation, she happened to look up at the clock and notice what time it was. And she did that 2 or 3 times, and enough that she became conscious of the fact that she was doing it. And so she stopped and she said, I still have problems when my husband isn't home at the length of time it takes him from 5 o'clock to drive home. And then she told me her story. Grew up in a troubled home, was abused, ran away, got used by a number of men along, and then somewhere along in that process, 15 years before, she had met this man she was married to. And he was, for her, a savior.
She didn't want anything to happen to me.
But these memories were so strong that if he wasn't home 30 minutes after, 25 minutes after 5 o'clock, all of these memories of these men who had abused her, who left her, mainly left her, would start flooding back. And she would think about where he's gone and who he's with. And
that's what they mean when they say that woman's talking to the devil.
yeah. And she said, I would have to.
He always wants talking to the devil. I mean, talk to me.
I would have to sit down. I'd have to get in a room by myself away from the kids, and I'd just have to sit there and start going through, He's been with me for 15 years. He's done this, he's done this, he's done this. He's never done this, he's never done this, he's never done this, he's never done this. To remind myself, to keep my mind on what he's done good, instead of all these memories coming
That's what she
back.
told you?
She told me that.
Well, see, me, I thought that she would be worried because he is, like you said, his first say.
No, she wasn't worried about,
That's not happening.
yeah, she didn't, she couldn't, yeah, but she couldn't get that far because it was this barrage of
She wasn't there yet.
yeah, she hadn't even gotten there.
Working on that.
She hadn't gotten to that stage yet. She was so frantic about,
She was there stuck in the ditch.
yeah, see? And in the early years, Scientology did a lot with drug addicts, PTSD people, abused people, because they're helping them get past what, in really many respects, is PTSD. And gaining control of their life so they can be free from these monkeys on their back. And so from their standpoint, you see, this is a great positive self-help movement, because it's not just self-help, there's this whole church helping you. There's all these people who walk this path with you, who are giving you guidance and encouragement and support to clear away all of these negative elements, so the Thetan will be free to achieve its most positive elements. And they build the scheme that this goes from you and your ability now to live with yourself in a more positive way, to your family in a more positive way, to your community in a more positive way. And they have this whole stage that ultimately ends up with the whole world, all of life, all living things, so that they become very great environmentalists. The whole world, the stuff, even the material, the universe, and then ends up in affinity, which is their term for some supreme being. So you get not just the psychological self-help to be a better person in yourself, but you become a better family member, community member, human being, and connect back to, again, the Hindu idea of the Great Spirit.
Become a monk.
And you become positive in all your relationships because you've cleared away all the negative angles, all the negative issues. So it can legitimately present itself, you see, as not just a psychology self-help program, it's a real religion, because it's trying to connect you with your total reality. And they break that down. I think it's in 7 stages, not stages. Well, I think they even use that term, but 7 components that start with you and end up with infinity, the supreme being. And in each concentric circle, you've got a wider range of reality that you've become positive with. But because infinity is so abstract, where does your information come from about how you're supposed to be ultimately relating to infinity. What values are positive and what values are negative? Engrams, I think, is the word they use for these negative vibes that you're carrying around. What makes it positive and what makes it negative? And because the infinity is like in AA, kind of just the supreme being, and you make out of it who, whatever you want, and we're not going to fight you over it. The real, genuine, quote, religious element of Scientology is pretty truncated because they have no source for any significant information about this supreme being. Hubbard didn't come like the Seventh-day Adventists or some of these other modern cults. He didn't come out of Christianity.
Didn't he come through more of Hinduism and a lot of?
In terms of religion, he's from there as much as anything. Yeah. And so he doesn't bring, you see, any great imagery, biblical imagery of God, either in terms of images and certainly in terms of values or standards. And that's true, you see, not only then ultimately there, but all the way down the line. How do you determine what are these negative impressions that you need to clear, these negative values that are preventing you? How do you define those? On what basis do you decide that this experience was a negative experience?
So we formed this in 1954?
Yeah, well, he was...
When?
The book comes out, the first book comes out in 1950.
1950?
Uh-huh.
So then I would think that the majority of the people that he helped was somewhere in the late 50s or the early 60s, which would be like Vietnam.
Yeah. A lot of the people that would have come in would have come from Christian backgrounds. But he's not asking them, this isn't a democracy. This is a scientific thing. And there's no scientific reason to go look at the Bible to see what it says about God, about infinity, about the supreme being. So the religious aspect, now you have to remember, in the 50s, when you see Scientology coming into existence, this idea that religion is fundamentally a matter of learning how to be as positive and as enhanced and as successful in life, however broadly you want to define the relationships of life, is the significant result of the enlightenment that has entered to a whole lot of churches. So there were Christian thinkers in the 50s and the 60s who were even bold enough to write books on God is dead. We enlightened human beings have come to the place that we now realize that this idea of a supreme being is pretty much wishful thinking. It was a projection of the ancients who had mystery that they hadn't been able to solve. We've been able to solve all that. We know why the sun does what it does and the moon does what it does, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We know why people get sick. There were germs and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that you had a vast swath of modern Christianity, both in Europe and in this country, who saw the Christian faith fundamentally as a matter of simply becoming a better person. And in some of our views, that was fundamentally a matter of being better in the way you think about yourself and feel about yourself and act about yourself. And of course, that's going to involve people that you have to be involved with so that you can't murder and you can't be mean and, you got to be good and the better, more helpful you are and kind and compassionate you are, the better. And then, of course, as we began to realize that, well, you can't really stop with just the people around you. You got to worry about the air you're breathing and the water that you're drinking. And so now we can move into our sensitivity to the world around us. And well, after all, there is no real scientific evidence, in fact, all of it's contrary, that we are necessarily different from the animals. So what's this deal about us being more important, that our drink, having this well or this oil well here is more important than these little toads or these little fishes or whatever. And so the whole the environment simply grows out of exactly the same thing. We simply broaden the scope of those things to which we should positively respond. But you're still bereft of any standard by which you make that judgment. It always amuses me, that many of the modern environmentalists are almost semi-nature pagans. Mother Nature is almost a god. And vast numbers of them, of course, are agnostic and even atheistic. Well, if you're an atheist and you know the history of this globe, what's the big deal if a few hundred species die off? How many dinosaurs disappeared?
Yeah.
It was no big deal. In fact, if they hadn't disappeared, we might not have could have come along. And so who are we to stand in the progress of the demise of species? And simply because you can say we're causing it, that doesn't change anything. How do you determine that our causing it is not the natural product of the evolutionary process that's been in existence without purpose and meaning from the very beginning? How do you determine that our polluting the air is wrong? What standard do you use to say we should stop that? Maybe we evolved for the very purpose of polluting the air.
You're saying that the reason for the religion and the Bible is to make people good or to help people to become better.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's made a lot of people worse.
Of course. Because we have abused what God gave us. We've misunderstood what God gave us. We have rejected what God gave us.
There you go. There you go, rejected.
And you see, ultimately you come down to whatever process you want to talk about, ultimately you have to come to grips with what is the standard for your values.
That's what's wrong with a lot of people. They're standards are not up to the Bible. And
Of course.
you give them the Bible, the word, they're looking at you like,
You're crazy.
right. And
That's stupid. Who would want to do that? Why would you want to act that way?
I've heard pastors saying they have to counsel so many families because the way they think, like after church, they
Yes.
think what you said is not right.
Yeah.
Because the way they.
Yeah. I had a lady after church, just a Bible study one night. And I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out what in the world she had reference to, because, it was long enough ago, I can't even remember the passage we were looking at. But on her way out that night, her husband shook my hands and said something, and she took my hand and shook my hand. I'm not even sure she shook my hand. She just looked at me and she said, "Don't you ever do that to me again."
And she was serious.
And she was dead serious.
The pastor said was that, like, they were talking to them about something they were doing, and she, I guess she didn't like it,
Yeah.
like you just said right now. So,
And, I know that I didn't press some do or don't thing. My suspicion is that,
But did you ask her?
yes, and she wouldn't talk to me.
Wouldn't talk to you?
No, she would not tell me.
she just gave them the
Well,
word.
you should know. That's a lot.
Yes,
You should know.
absolutely. See? I should have,
You know that. You should know.
yes,
You know what I'm talking about.
yes, right.
Read my mind.
And so in the process of developing this, they have developed a rich what's the word I want? Catechism, I suppose, would be the best word, of a whole variety of things, like emotions, how to rate the emotions. They developed a whole program on how to interpret the emotional feeling of another person and knowing the most appropriate emotional response to give to produce the greatest positive result. And obviously, if you bought into that program and you rigorously followed it, you probably would get along with people a whole lot more effectively than you did if you didn't naturally, intuitively, or grow up in a family that taught you how to do that. You'd be a far better neighbor, friend, church member, parent, if you figured out that when your kid responds this way, and with this emotion, that this emotion over here is not the way to respond. You need to find the more positive thing. So they developed a whole scale of things like that.
But it's funny because a lot of people are on it, and they just know, and so they can do that, But I guess a lot of people would have to learn that don't get that.
Sure.
And so I guess.
Oh, yeah.
So that is good in a way, because, sometimes I'll see how people act and I think, they don't even have a clue. But they're just being so. And you can always be nice and get something better and listen to somebody. Feel them, be empathy. But empathy is the most important thing, and many people don't even.
Yeah. I worked for several years in a business college in Cincinnati.
You don't want
No, they probably want it, but they never,
Some people don't want it.
it's the most important thing.
And we were right on the edge of downtown Cincinnati. Big housing projects right next door to us. Vast majority of our students were people who were dropouts. Many of them had high school diplomas, but they could barely read. They could barely do elemental math. And we were trying to train them adequately to be able to get a decent job. So we had a program in medical lab technician, bookkeeping, basic electronics, several things like that. It was discouraging because there were so few who were not just unequipped educationally, they were unequipped socially. And so I don't know how many times after a graduation ceremony or the next day, one of the teachers would say to me, well, we graduated 5 people next year, this week, this quarter, but they'll never be able to get a job, or at least never be able to hold a job. And so, you know, you're dealing with people with all these negative elements. Sounds to me like you've got a good program going here if you could get all of them turned around into being good people. Let me bring this up. This is their creed. We of the church believe. Let me increase the size here a little bit so you can see it.
That was what you sent us, huh?
Yes, this is one of the things I sent you, I'm pretty sure. Here we go. That all men, whatever race and creed, were created equal, that all have the inalienable right to their own religious practice, to their own lives, to their sanity, to their own defense, to conceive, choose, assist, or support their own organizations, to think freely, to talk freely, to write freely, to the creation of their own kind, that the souls of men have the rights of men, and all these times they're using men. This is mankind, not man, male, man. This shows you how antiquated they are. They couldn't write this creed, Hubbard couldn't write this creed in the 21st century and use this terminology. That the study of the mind and the healing of mentally caused ills should not be alien to religion. That no agency less than God has the power to suspend or set aside these rights overtly or covertly. We, the church, believe that man is basically good, that he is seeking to survive. You ever heard that before?
Yeah.
I read that.
And now there's even a debate in the scientific community as to whether or not the genes of living things are, to what degree they are committed to survival and to what degree they are open to altruistic concerns, so that surviving may not be the end all concern of living things. Now, they hedge that, of course, you see, by saying that our survival, a person's survival, depends not only upon himself and upon his fellows and his attainment of brotherhood with the universe. And so they're going to concede that in order to survive, we have to be a genuine village. But they still start with this underlying premise that our ultimate, deepest concern is to survive. And in some of their works, they make this untimed, to survive forever, for eternity.
I remember reading one thing back where he said that good until you believe.
Yeah.
That's the problem. One of the problems they say they have with Jesus, because he came to save us,
Yes,
And he said, we're good, so he shouldn't come to save
he
us.
doesn't have to save
We're
us.
not evil.
Yeah, we're good, and all we have to do is learn to control these negative engrams that are ground into us, to overcome them, and with proper guidance and support and encouragement, we can do that. It's all there. It's in us as we are.
That's why we have so many prisons.
Yes. Now,
Yeah, it makes you wonder why some people are born and they just sit there, they just seem to know, they have empathy, they have feelings and stuff. And then other people seem like they're void of it.
yeah, and we still have that raging debate, how much of that is innately genetic and how much of it is nurture, even very early in our lives. And they've done all kinds of experiences with infants, both intentional and unintentional, that have demonstrated the overwhelming importance of human nurture from the very beginning. Now, why'd you have to do an experiment to figure that out? But it's happened. The classic experiment was the one from several years ago in communist Romania. There was an organized program of orphans, many of whom were taken at infancy, at birth. And they were warehoused for, they were in a room where they got fed, they got changed a couple of times a day at least, but that was it. I mean, nobody held them, nobody, even when they were being fed from almost the very beginning, the bottle was propped up and given to them, nobody held them, hugged them, talked to them. They came in, changed them, came in, fed them, and the rest of the time they were left. And almost irreparable damage done to those children because of the lack of, they've even done experiments where with animals, where they've put a monkey's skin on a doll with a baby monkey. And just that made a difference. It wasn't even a live monkey that was holding it. It was a doll, a plastic doll, but it did have a piece of fur on it. And it made a difference in how this infant physically grew. Because in that Romanian orphanage, they had children who were 2 years old that still were like this.
That was in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a lot of people
Yeah.
went over to,
Yeah. No, they didn't even grow.
You have to have love.
They didn't even grow.
If you don't,
And again, you see, that one of my evidences for the fact that we aren't just thetans in a body. This body is far more deeply embedded in our identity as a person than most of us Westerners, even Western Christians, understand. And that complicates how we deal with all kinds of things, including mental illness. It complicates addiction, chemical addictions, because we've known for a long time that there are certain people who almost from the very first dose they take are controlled. And there are other people who can take it for years and years and years before it finally gets a hold of them to any significant degree. There's a deeper, broader connection than we're in Western Christianity generally able to even conceive, let alone deal with. And I think that's where they start off with a false premise.
Now, where did all the babies go, the ones that Hitler had?
I don't know.
A lot of them went to Iceland, didn't they?
I have no idea.
That's what.
Could be.
Probably went to the gas station.
Anybody bring a suggestion for next week?
What? About the KKK.
You want
So I'll wear sheets.
No, it's not about the one that he was trying to grow with blue eyes and blonde hair.
Yeah, well, what he did is they became, parts of his regiment and everything, because he wanted an Aryan nation, he wanted blue eyes and white skin.
I read that a bunch of them went to Iceland, but they took them over there to Iceland.
Could be. I'm not familiar with that part of the story.
So it came over the years, we got all the years. No, it's true. Why is he laughing? Yeah, they're,
See you next week, Cephas.
a lot of them have helped us with our rockets and stuff.
I'll send you some info.
I think you could go look that up now.
Something.